Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Mark. For those of you out there who haven't met me before, my name is Erin. I'm National Head of Product Integration at OMG Content. I'm absolutely humbled to be moderating this panel and sharing a stage. I'm a bit nervous. I mean, you guys are awesome. With these people up here, thank you so much, Mike and Nerissa, for your presentations this morning. I learnt so much. I'm sure everyone in the audience learnt a lot as well. Thanks for your time and welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Wayne Philbert, the legend.
Oh, I don't know.
Client Partner at Initiative. Also the chair of the MFA DE&I Council. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Welcome to the panel discussion. So today's topic that we will be unpacking is open-minded leadership and how that actually leads to a more diverse workplace. It also leads to innovative thinking, and it also leads to growth for ourselves, for our team, and also for our businesses as well. But our main goal at the panel this morning is to leave you with some really easy things that you can all be doing Monday to Friday to make you all more open-minded leaders. So in saying that, let's kick off. I'd love to learn what you learnt from the presentations this morning and how you're going to take that back to your leadership. Wayne, would you like to begin?
Sure, first off, I have to admit the presentations were amazing. I don't know if anyone else will feel exactly the same way. I'm pretty sure that's the case, but we generally get such amazing speakers and talent here, and this is no exception. So thank you so much for everything that you shared. I think the first thing that I'm probably going to take away and look to have more people do is the point you mentioned, Nerissa, which is about seeing the person first, and in that, making sure that people actually take the time to listen to everybody, hear them, see them. And it's really challenging, bearing in mind the sort of rush we're all in the game, trying to do everything for all the clients, all the projects we're working on. But actually just taking a moment to listen and see and hear that individual, I think will make a significant difference. That's the one thing I'll take away in a nutshell.
Thank you, Wayne. Nerissa, did you have the same sentiment?
Well, actually, I would take away something from what Mike said today, which, for me, I do a lot of work in the D&I space, but when we think about bias, like, I always think about conscious and unconscious bias, but actually through Mike's presentation, just looking at the various different forms of bias there can be and be aware of that was really powerful. And I'm going to actually take that away, and especially the one where, you've got to look at opposites and do it a number of times and the strategies that can be applied, which will really help in how we can check our own biases, like look within to then look outside. So I'll be taking that away. Thanks, Mike.
Mike, how did you feel about it?
Well, I'm going to say something about Nerissa.
No, you too.
Also polite.
Yeah. But I think for me, I think Nerissa's message about belonging, and as I was thinking about it, of sort of past time of feeling that myself, and then what made that, and then thinking about how to create that, not only for people in my business, but for people that we work with as well. And I don't mind sort of share. I know it's too deep a thing to kind of share, but literally what was kind of important for me in my own kind of reflection on that was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, and with the rest of the family, and tea was a very important part of it. And tea and these things called Welsh cakes, which growing up in a Welsh family, Welsh cakes are very significant things. But it's sort of comfort, welcome, but cups of tea just seem to be something that is a really nice offer, when you're in people's company or whatever it is that they want to have. But, that kind of idea of kind of more consciously creating belonging and making people feel welcome has seemed a great thing.
I agree. Tea's a mood, isn't it? It just brings people together, right?
With the bean.
Yeah. Love a coffee too, Wayne.
There you go.
Now I'm going to ask some questions that were submitted by you guys, the audience. So thank you very much for submitting your questions before this session today. I've got them written down on my cue cards. And then after we've discussed the questions, we'll also move to a live Q&A. So whilst we're speaking, if you do have any questions that you would like to ask, please remember them or write them down, and when it's time, raise your hand and we'll make sure that a roving mic gets to you. Also, if you do ask a question today, you'll be given a copy of Nerissa's book, which I think is going to be an amazing read. So, first question to the panel, have you ever pitched a new way of working and how did you manage any resistance? Mike, would you like to share?
Yes. Pitched a, excuse me, a number of years ago, pitched a new kind of idea for an advertising campaign to one of the major newspapers in Sydney, who had a ferocious editor who everyone was really, really scared of, and just you're an idiot, you know, because the idea was not so much a new advertising campaign, was actually you need to change the things that you're writing about in your newspaper. And they just, oh God, Col Allen, you know, people know who Col Allen is, but he was a scary guy. But the approach was, here's the evidence, here's the data, this is why you need to change. And he was going, okay, seems a good idea. And that was it. You know, so there was anticipated, I guess, you know, hostility, but there was none when a good argument was presented with good evidence, and not just, hey, we think this is a cool idea. It was, here's why you need to do this. And he was like, makes sense.
Easy. Love that. Wayne?
Look, in our game, I feel that we end up having to influence people and make presentations, recommendations to get people to see the world the way we'd like to. And one of the things that I found and learned in my time, as I'm sure a lot of us have, is that it's never like a one magic bullet that does it. It's not a one-shot situation. So invariably what I know is, one, it takes time, sequential conversations in order to get somebody to maybe see the world the way that you'd like them to see it. Two, definitely understand the motivations of the person involved. So in this particular instance, when we're trying to get someone who's very habitually bought a particular channel in exactly the same way for a long period of time, and having to bring them up to pace with the way in which it's now done, for them felt like a risk. So we need to be able to explain to them the risk of staying with the path they're on relative to the opportunity of the new way of going about it, which, again, to Mike's point, you present the case and say, this is what we're thinking, and keep having those conversations, sometimes in groups, sometimes individually. You then end up with them coming along that particular journey with you. But, you know, the ambition of, great, I'm going to present this to you and have them immediately think, this is amazing, I'm going to go with it. That just doesn't happen. It happens in movies. So, again, be prepared. Don't expect for it to happen in a very short period of time.
Nerissa, how did you feel about that?
I would agree with parts of what both of you have said, actually. And I think for me, it's understanding why people are opposing the idea or saying no to it. And often people are not saying no because they want to say no. It's often they say no because they don't understand or they don't really know, as in the other no. And for me, it's actually going deeper and speaking to the why. Yeah, and I feel when we can share the why behind something, what is the story, what is the narrative that fits in with the facts and figures that we're showing. When we can talk to people about the why, that's what clicks for people. And then you get people to meet halfway and meet and agree on the new decision. So for me, it's kind of understanding the why.
Nice. And how can we be more open-minded when hiring new team members? Nerissa?
How can we be more open-minded when hiring new team members? I think everything that I spoke to in terms of being open-minded is a great way to take it in and implement. But I think we've been used to, and you know, if we think about the friends we make, the family we've grown up with, we generally try to look at people that look similar to us, speak similar to us, have something in common. And that kind of bias that you talked about, Mike, goes into hiring practices as well. And if we want to shift that and change that, I would encourage people to start not by just looking at the hiring, but you've got to start by expanding that elsewhere as well. And we know that the 5 closest people to us are generally the ones that shape our future, that shape what we're going to do. And look and examine like your 5 closest friends, the 5 closest mentors that you have, the 5 leaders that you have. Do they all look the same? Do they all sound the same? What different perspectives are they bringing in? Because it's when we can shift our own internal perspectives, then we'll take that into not just hiring, but any practice that we do. But it's definitely one that we need to be implementing into when we go in to hire people. Is not hiring for culture fit, but for hiring for what the individual is bringing to the organization that might be different to what you do today.
I think Mike's bias presentation will help there as well. Mike, did you have something to share?
Well, we've completely changed the way that we recruit quite recently this year. We found that we had an over-reliance actually on headhunters, who not only kind of charge kind of quite large commissions, but are themselves quite biased in the way that they kind of put forward candidates. And we realized that we'd spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on recruitment for people who weren't necessarily best suited. So we went through an exercise where we literally wrote down all of the things that we thought people in the business that the behavioural architects did. There were 32 of them, which range from research things to strategy things to behavioural science things, people and culture, finance. And then we grouped them into 7 core competencies, developed a kind of a set of skill sets around that, and then wrote job descriptions, which we advertised. We used an HR consultant to shortlist. From that, we now only interview people on a panel basis. So 3 people from our team will interview a new candidate with pre-prepared questions against that job role, and it's done simultaneously, and we make a decision all at once immediately afterwards. Before that, it was, I saw someone interesting, perhaps you'd like to see them, and it kind of a bit of baton passing, and it just wasn't a good process. So we've just redesigned it to kind of minimize bias and just make it much more suited to encourage the right kind of diversity for our business.
It's a great process, and one that I'm sure that we'll be able to implement as well when we're hiring. And knowing the hiring landscape in the media industry at the moment is quite challenging. Wayne, from a media perspective, how can we remain more open-minded when hiring?
You're absolutely right. I do feel like we need to broaden that, the kind of scope and that net so we can end up with as much diversity and breadth of talent coming into the organisation as we possibly can. So there's a range of things that can actually be done. I mean, historically, what we tend to do, I think most agencies would do the same thing, is that you've got a range of organisations and universities that many of the talent would actually come in directly from, and that helps. You feel like there's an element of pre-selection there. But I do feel like we've got a much greater opportunity to look a little further. Anyone who shows interest, aptitude, and initiative, no pun intended, in terms of being able to look at this particular game, this industry, and show interest, that I think is really important. Another thing that's worthwhile bearing in mind as well is when we're actually looking to interview people and bring them into the organisation, is make sure we've got a very broad and rich mix and diverse mix of people who are actually going through that interview process. So instead of it being just one individual who's clearly going to have, as much as we like to avoid it, our own sense of biases and kind of restrictions in terms of our thinking, bringing other people into the conversation, making sure that they've got one exposure to different parts of the business, but also you hear from them about what they see, what they value. That helps you make a really informed decision about the sort of person you're looking to bring in. So, when you're, 1, casting the net certainly an awful lot wider, 2, being very open-minded about the people that you come in and try not to make any judgments immediately just when you see a name or a background. And then when you're interviewing them, make sure you've got a range of people being able to interview them. You end up with a far better outcome.
And on that, being open-minded essentially means trying new things, right? Every day, every week, every month, taking the team along for the journey, also making sure that the team is included. But on that, how have you managed resistance if someone may have said, we've done that before, we've tried it, it didn't work, and just completely shut down the idea or the path forward? How did you manage that, Mike?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, that, because you're dealing with somebody's, they've committed to a point of view and they're kind of endowed to a point of view, and there's kind of the confirmation bias that I spoke of. So it's a really tricky thing to do, and I think the best ways of doing it, to my mind, are always to kind of acknowledge, what people are saying, like, you have a point here, but here's another perspective, or that's one way of looking at it. Here's another, and here's another, and I think trying to take people on that kind of journey is the best way to go. It's tricky if someone's just kind of put up the shutters like that.
Sir, I can see you nodding along.
Yeah, similar. I think we're all challenged sometimes when we have to try something new for the first time, or something different for the first time. And I think there is a sentiment to go, well, if it's worked this way, then that's the right way to do it. Because we've done it for so long, it must be. So then when you offer a new idea and someone goes, but we've always done it that way. Or, we tried it and it didn't work, therefore we shouldn't try anything again. And it goes back to that, if something didn't work, then just try again. But it's about not trying the same thing again. Because if we try the same thing expecting a different result, we're not going to get it. Because if you do the same thing, you're going to get the same result. So it's understanding what is the outcome, what is the result I want to drive, and then working back to say, what do I need to do differently? What do we need to do differently to drive a different outcome? And just because the first thing we tried didn't work, doesn't mean we don't try again. And I often say, don't let the first time you try something new be the last time you try something new.
That's a nice saying. Wayne, how do you feel?
So I agree with everything you've said. I think it all makes perfect sense. The only thing that I'll add as well is the industry that we're in, I think, is famed for its dynamism. The fact of the matter is that the way the world was at literally any point in time previous to where we are right now is very different. And as a result of that, it's going to require different techniques and different methods to actually get to the outcomes we're after. And I think most people, generally speaking, are probably wedded to the outcome, wedded to the result, not necessarily the process that is adhered to or the process that's followed. So what I would look to do, I think, if we've got a resistance, we've got some sort of apprehension that someone may well have, it's a case of being able to explain why the landscape is different, explain why the dynamic is different, and that's the reason why we need to introduce or interject with a new approach, some new technology or some new philosophy in order to get the outcome that they're so wedded to. So again, if you can get someone to maybe just split those elements apart, you've got a better chance of getting your way of seeing things across.
And on that journey of understanding, do you think there are any brain training exercises we can do to be more open-minded?
To me?
It's coming.
Okay, right, wow. Brain training. Look, someone told me this before, it's really quite interesting, which is I know enough to be dangerous. And just about the way I think. And what I think is this, I tend to think to myself, if I think I know something, if I'm 100% confident about a thing, that is when I tend to be a little bit nervous. I tend to be very, very freaked out by that. There was a wonderful saying someone said, I can't remember who it is, it's not that important what said is, which is that it's not what you don't know that trips you up, it's what you know for a fact that trips you up. So there are times when I think, yeah, I know this is a particular thing and it's going to get me where I need to go, and it absolutely isn't. And then all of a sudden you've got a lot more work to do. So the kind of brain training thing for me is spend a bit of time just checking what you think you really know.
Thank you. Mike, brain training?
So to build really on, because we're all sort of agreeing here, but to build on what Wayne said, I think there are a couple of things in what I spoke of that are good ideas. So forecast twice, seek other viewpoints, those sorts of things. And that those are good things to do, but what can be tricky is to know when to do them. And therefore it's helpful to have something that we refer to as a behavioural foothold. So, for example, that's Wayne saying, when I'm really confident about something, that's a moment in which I know that I need to check, maybe forecast twice in that moment, maybe seek other perspectives, but you kind of need a trigger or a foothold or a signal, that sets off alarm bells to tell you to kind of be, more exploratory or more cautious, proceed with caution.
Nerissa, how did you feel about that?
I'm nodding because I do agree. But when I think about what I do or what helps with that, I think about the lens that I look through when I'm looking at something. And I've got to check myself a number of times because we can all find ourselves in situations where, things have happened before. We find ourselves in situations where we're challenged, or how do we be open-minded around this particular situation? And when I find myself in that situation, I look at it through the lens of what is this teaching me? What can I learn through this? Because rather than saying, why am I here? Or why is this person saying something? Or why is this coming back? Asking instead, what is this teaching me? And when we look at things from a path of learning and a lens of learning, that is when we start actually growing through. And what I talk about in growing through is not just going through or getting through life, but actually growing and learning from each lesson that we learn into the next. So for me, training our brain is to look at everything like a learning thing, like what am I going to learn?
Learning journey, I agree, it's very important. Mike, back to you. How can we control our own bias when it comes to being open-minded?
yeah, I think it's it's a very difficult thing to do, because we do have biases and we can be blind to them. In fact, it's very likely that we're blind to them. So, and again, I think just as Daniel Kahneman says, he's like just as prone to these biases. Just because you know about this stuff doesn't necessarily make you less prone to them. But I think it is a matter of remembering to go through those processes, to seek opinion. I love what Nerissa was saying about seek to understand, before. So I think, seeking other opinions, seeking to understand, and some of those things that I mentioned in my presentation about, the processes that you can go through. So, seeking other views as well privately, and using those kind of checks and balances, I suppose.
Wayne, I know you have some experience in this area. How can we control our own bias?
I find there's a tension in this, and I'll try and explain what I mean briefly. There's a tension in us trying to get almost everything we're trying to get done in a very short period of time with incredible efficiency, with the time that's required to think through things as well as we'd like to, and as much as we'd like to, and involve as many stakeholders as we possibly can. The way I would look to do it, I think, is identifying those moments in particular. When I know I'm time crunched, when I know I'm trying to hustle through something pretty quickly, that's when I think, all right, I'm probably going to start making a few mistakes here. I'm probably going to jump to a couple of incorrect conclusions. So how can I either get someone else's point of view, ask someone who may well be thoroughly unrelated and uninvolved in this, and make sure they can actually make sense of it, so I'm not overcomplicating a matter as well. For me, it's those particular moments where I can just try and get through those biases where I think, you know what, she's going to be okay. And apparently we're all above average, so it's still going to be fine, right? So with those things in the backdrop, I just think to myself, look, you know what, you're probably trying to do something really quickly here. That is when it's going to fall over. Get some other points of view on all of this.
Definitely. Nerissa, what's your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is to be aware that we all have it. Because anyone sitting in this room saying, I don't have bias, you're like, I'm totally open-minded, I have no biases. I think that's a bias in itself, because we all have it. And I think it's being aware that we have it and acknowledging that we are going to get things wrong sometimes. We are going to do it, but it's that process of learning and growing. And it's when you acknowledge that you have it, then you're more likely to check it. So if I know that I have this bias, I'm going to then next time go, okay, I'm aware of this now, so what can I do to change it? And then back to your points around what can we do to change it is, taking more time, thinking about why have I made that decision in the past? What in my experience has influenced that decision, and how can I get a different perspective on it? Therefore, I make maybe a different decision the next time.
Thing as well is actually don't be afraid to be told you're wrong. Yeah, the amount of times we all think, okay, look, I'm leading a team or I'm leading a project or whatever, doesn't mean you're going to know the answer to everything and you are thoroughly infallible. If anything's the case, it's most likely you are quite fallible, right? So as a result, just get a different point of view and let someone say to you, actually, you know what, that's not 100% right and you need to consider this. Welcome those kind of counterpoint views, I think is a good point.
Yeah, and learn from that. So to sum up what we've discussed this morning, I'm going to go around the panel from Wayne to Mike to Nerissa. What is one thing that everyone in this room can do today to be more open-minded in their leadership?
So for me, the thing I think, implore everyone to do is active listening. Take the time to really listen to what people are saying, what they're trying to say, especially those, I think, one of you two mentioned that she really should have paid more attention and listened a little bit more, but I heard what was said, not who was said it. So please chalk that one up there. But if you've got someone in the room who's not saying something, take the time to hear what they have to say, take them aside, have a conversation. One thing I found is people sometimes don't like talking in, you was talking about actually, I've come to my mind now, in group environments. They really like the opportunity to talk individually. So make sure you actually find those people, hear what they have to say. You'll get some real nuggets and valuable gems out of those situations. Active listening, that's from me.
Mike?
I think being quiet at times, helps with active listening as well. Like I know that for me in my kind of work situations, I can get very excited with kind of ideas and kind of want to share them, and I think other people might experience as that, sort of, just kind of closing out the available airtime. So for me, one of the things that I know that I have to do is just kind of quieten myself down, because it's just, it's kind of, I guess, part of my DNA sometimes to allow a bit of silence that someone else can enter. So it's a little bit different from, maybe that is active listening, but I know that's something that I find that I have to give myself a nudge, quite regularly, just to, create that space for other people. Others in the room might find the same thing.
Nerissa, what's the one thing from you?
I think there's been a lot that we've learned today, and this discussion has been great. And I think when you start implementing that in the jobs that you do and the day-to-day stuff that you do, you think about that every day you're in an industry, you're working in a space where you are creating stories, content, narrative, where you are changing how people see things, what they hear, what they take in. And every one of you here is going to leave with something different that you've picked up today that you're going to take out and implement. I hope so. But when you think about it, think about what is the story that you are writing today that is going to be worth reading tomorrow.
Great advice, thank you. So I'll open questions up to the floor. If anyone has a question, please raise their hand. Roving mics will find you. We have 2 down the front. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Leona from Spotify. I actually used to work with Wayne, so very excited to see you on the stage. First of all, thank you. Really enjoyed that. I really wanted to touch on something that Wayne touched on a little bit earlier, and I would love your advice on it. But I think everyone in this room would agree that our industry is incredibly time poor. And I think that a lot of our biases are made based on us needing to make quick decisions. So I would love to hear your advice on how we can, I guess, make sure that we're not introducing those biases based on that, and how we can move past that.
It was either you.
It was both of us.
Both of you,
Okay,
if that's okay. I feel like Wayne's already touched on it a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, time poor's time poor is fact and fiction, I think, sometimes, in that again, speaking from our own kind of experience, that we, I think, can feel very, very time poor, but very often we don't do enough to actually kind of challenge deadlines, quite honestly. And I think that's so it can be that, I know it's different in the world of media, where sort of, deadlines, can be much more solid, but and are mostly much more solid. But I think challenging deadlines, framing it not as, I think people don't challenge deadlines sometimes to get more time because of fear, that I'm not doing my job well, I'm not very organized, those sorts of negative self-talk sort of fears. Whereas if the request is framed in terms of what is needed, then that can be different. So that's one thing. I think that, again, from my own observation, I don't think we do enough. We don't necessarily ask for more time, and very often when we ask, we get it. So that's something. Then the other thing is, I think, almost in relation to kind of productivity and efficiency. So sort of time boxing tasks, getting sure that sometimes there'll be too many people in a meeting who aren't contributing. So, so making sure that the team's kind of divided up in terms of their responsibilities. Does everyone need to be there? So there's a sort of productivity answer. I don't know that there's a bias answer. The only bias answer I can think of is in respect of the kind of how we frame asking for more time, and if we can reframe it as a positive and a powerful thing to do, because the outcome will be better. Nerissa?
Yeah, I would touch also on, when we're thinking we're time poor, I think that's across, I think everyone is just time poor. I think it's just how we are now, because the rate of change, the speed of change has never been this fast, and it's never going to be this slow again. It's just, we've got to accept that. But it goes back to that, that there's a story about someone pulling a cart and the cart's not working, but they're like, well, we have to get quicker, so let's not stop and fix the cart. Let's just keep pulling a cart that's broken. And it's actually going, well, if you actually take time to fix it and you stop for a minute and actually fix the wheel, you're actually going to go faster. You're going to get there better. So it's about looking at what is that outcome and how, and not looking at, I don't have the time to do it, but it's like a necessary practice. Like everything else that you have to do, getting a different perspective needs to be factored into that time frame around what you do.
Things on all of this as well. Now, this doesn't work all the time. It works a lot of the time, and there are always going to be situations and clients where they're incredibly specific about the timeline they need to work to and the deadline that needs to be hit. So with that being said, what I have found is that generally speaking, clients want quality. Clients want things that are well thought through, that are well rationalised, that are detailed, that are suited to their task. And if you tell them that it takes a bit more time for the right stakeholders on your side to align and get what's needed together to get that output for them, and they're going to be really thrilled and happy with the output, and more to the point, you've actually allowed a bit of time for it. So if this thing is due on 2 o'clock on a Thursday, don't call at 1 o'clock on a Thursday and say it's not going to happen. You're likely to fail on that particular situation. But if you explain to them that this is, I call it like on the altar of quality. If you sacrifice it on the altar of quality, you are likely to get what you want.
And another question?
Hi, I'm Vanessa from UM. Often I find as individuals we get in our own way and we're our harshest critics, and we can grasp onto identities of people who we used to be or traits that we used to have that may have evolved. So I'm wondering, Nerissa, how do we apply the sentiment of see the person before the identity to ourselves?
Great question. I would answer this by saying that you need to be talking to yourself like you would speak to your best friend, that you would speak to the person that you'll look up to, the person that is going to be like that you would champion. You've got to talk to yourself as your biggest advocate, as your biggest champion. Because sometimes it's easier for us to back our colleagues, back our friends. But when it comes to ourselves, that negative chatter starts. And at the end of the day, we're all people as well. And we need to be speaking to ourselves as our biggest advocate. You need to be your biggest champion, championing all of your goals in order for that narrative, the inner narrative to change, and therefore the outward narrative will change as well.
Nice. Mike, what did you think?
It's a great question. I'm going to throw in some philosophy and sort of just challenge the idea that there is this sort of unitary view of self, that as self, that's just one thing. And, I kind of buy into the view much more that who we are is sort of constructed from a whole series of different contexts and experiences and relationships that we experience at different times. So, you, me, I'm different with my mother to how I am in a work situation to how I am with my mates that I play rugby with, and so on and so on and so on, that there is a multiplicity of selves. And if you're looking to, in a sense, kind of, be better in a particular area, something that I find is that there will be some part of your life where you are extremely competent and extremely confident, and you can tap into that feeling and draw it across. So to give a more concrete example of that, there's one quite young member of our team who is outrageously lively, great fun, but when it comes to presenting, suddenly becomes incredibly tongue-tied and nervous, and maybe we've all been there, but what I've been trying to do with encouraging that person is just when you're presenting the work to clients, just be how you are when you're talking to me or to the rest of the team. So it's kind of drawing on that different self, that self in a different context sometimes. Not sure. I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah. Wayne, how do you feel about that?
I think it's a fantastic question, I really do. There was an interview I remember watching some time ago. There's an actor by the name of Wentworth Miller who was in countless different shows. Prison Break is one of them. And he was talking about mental health and his wrestling with his own situation and how he basically worked his way through it. And what he said was the kind of negative self-talk that he went through was a real factor in all of that. And his words stuck with me. What he said was, if he spoke to himself, and the way he spoke to himself, he spoke to his friends the same way they would not be friends. Yeah, that's essentially it. And so this voice just comes in uninvited, I might add, and says whatever it wants to say, and then just walks off and leaves you with the wreckage of it all, which really is no good. It's exactly right.
Rude.
How very dare they? So really, it's not the way you want to kind of live your life. Now, it's really hard to stop it, and I don't necessarily think it's possible, maybe, but what I do think is you can counter it. When it comes, you can absolutely address it, acknowledge it's happened. This voice has popped in and said, oh, you, whatever. Okay, it's happened. Reaffirm with some positive thinking to yourself about things that you are really confident about. Put those other thoughts to one side and continue on about your day. But don't let those thoughts just continue to permeate their way around your head and just keep interrupting your day. Because again, they're unbidden. You certainly didn't ask them to come through, but you can absolutely check and counter them.
I think that's great advice. Not to think about the thoughts and get lost in a mind current. Thank you very much. That concludes our panel discussion for today. Thank you to our audience for leaning in and listening. Thank you to two questions at the front. And huge round of applause to our panel. You have been amazing. And yeah, it's been an honour to share the stage with you this morning, so thank you very much.